the Kakhovka task force released a video stating that Ukrainian troops had broken through the Russians' first line of defense in the Kherson region. Source: OU, Kakhovka, interlocutor of the UP in the Armed Forces, head of the Joint Press Center of the Security and Defense Forces, South, Natalya Gumenyuk in a comment to hromarske. Literally, the 109th Regiment (DPR) withdrew from their positions in the Kherson region. Russian paratroopers, who were their support, fled the battlefield. Details: the task force also released a video in which a Russian military complains that the armed forces have broken through the Russians' first line of defense in the Kherson region. Ukrayinska Pravda sources confirm the breakthrough. Another source in the Armed Forces of Ukraine in the south notes that in some areas there was a breakthrough in the first line of defense of the occupiers, but it's too early to talk about anything specific, a big front. The Armed Forces of Ukraine launched offensive operations in many areas in southern Ukraine, Gumenyuk said. The well-known military expert Oleg Janov recalled that the Russian invaders had built 3 lines of defense in the Kherson region. He spoke about this on his YouTube channel, commenting on the offensive of the Armed Forces of Ukraine in the south and the possible liberation of occupied Kherson. Everyone was delighted, but let's wait for official information regarding the further advancement of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Questions immediately began about when we take Kherson, liberate it, and so on. Let me remind you that the enemy has built 3 lines of defense in the Kherson direction. So far, we are talking about breakthrough of the first of them. Although we already have experience. We then reached the third. We'll see, Janov said. He urged to wait for official information about exactly where the Armed Forces of Ukraine broke through the defense of the occupiers, and what exactly this breakthrough was the result of, the work of artillery and aviation or the successful actions of the Armed Forces of Ukraine as a whole. In the Kherson region, the invaders were left with practically no large bridges that destroyed the Armed Forces of Ukraine thanks to HIMARS multiple launch rocket systems. Only pedestrian crossings remained. Literally, the situation in the temporarily occupied territory of the Kherson region is extremely difficult. Big and terrible HIMARS destroyed almost all the big bridges, Antonovsky Railway, Automobile and Novokakhovsky. Details: it is reported that only pedestrian crossings are now surviving. Thus, the Russian invaders were cut off from the supply of weapons and personnel from the territory of Crimea. Also, the speaker of the head of the Odessa OVA, Sergei Brachuk, spoke about the situation in the Kherson region at the moment. Brachuk's direct speech: Berislav. Hitting the machine plant, where the Russians were based. Hitting the post where the Russians were based near the Machansky North Crimean Canal. Hitting the crossing in Lvovo, Bereslavsky district. Everything that was there was minus. Gavrilovka, Bereslavsky district. Minus BK. What came before? Satellite images from August 27 show that the Russian invaders are building a pontoon bridge right next to the Antonovsky Bridge damaged by Ukrainian strikes in Kherson. Germany will send the latest weapons to Kyiv in the coming weeks. Berlin can also take responsibility for providing Ukraine with certain types of weapons. Germany will support the defense of Ukraine for as long as it takes. In the coming weeks, Berlin will send the latest weapons to Kyiv, Scholz said. In addition to sending radar systems and drones to Ukraine, Germany can take on a special responsibility in terms of building up the potential of artillery and modern air defense systems of Ukraine, the Chancellor said. Earlier, Scholz said that Germany would not supply Ukraine with weapons that could be used to shell Russian territory. Berlin does not want the war to escalate into a completely different conflict. Recall that Germany handed over to Ukraine 3 more Gepard self-propelled anti-aircraft guns, 11 M113 tracked armored personnel carriers and 1,000 dry rations. Before that, Germany handed over to Ukraine the first 3 Gepard anti-aircraft self-propelled guns. The Armed Forces of Ukraine also received several thousand ammunition for them. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine expressed concern to the Turkish ambassador in connection with the information about the transportation of S-300 PMU-2 missile systems by the Sparta II ship chartered by the Russian Ministry of Defense from Syria to Russia through the Bosphorus. The deputy minister expressed the hope that the Turkish side will strictly adhere to its decision of February 28, 2022 to close the Black Sea Straits to Russian warships during the Russian-Ukrainian war in line with Turkey's consistent position to support the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. According to military independent experts Naval News, Russia was able to transfer missiles for the S-300 complex across the Bosphorus to the Black Sea from its bases in Syria. The ship likely sailed from the Syrian Tartus, where S-300 components were assembled on the pier, presumably from a facility in Masyaf in northern Syria. The ship set sail on August 20 and on the night of August 24–25 passed the Bosphorus. On August 27, the ship entered Novorossiysk. Sparta II is owned by Oboron Logistics LLC, which was sanctioned by the U.S. in May and is controlled by the Russian Defense Ministry. The crew is civilian, but the cargo is often military.